She was only 19 when she married a 75-year-old millionaire, thinking it was just a temporary arrangement. On their wedding night, something in his gaze revealed that nothing was as it seemed. Secrets hidden for decades began to emerge between glasses of wine and whispered words, and it was on that silent night that the truth finally surfaced. And she understood the danger she was in. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The Rising. Sun illuminated the extensive vineyards of Parker Vineyards, a property that had belonged to Emily's family for generations. As she walked between rows of ripe grapes, the 19-year-old jotted notes about this year's harvest in her notebook. Her brown hair danced in the morning breeze, and her green eyes reflected the passion she felt for this place. Emily grew up among these hills, learning every secret of fermentation from her grandfather, her greatest mentor. With a degree in agronomy, she was preparing to start her master's in enology in New York, dreaming of transforming her family's traditional vineyard into an artisanal production center that would blend tradition with innovation. "This year we'll produce the best wine in the region, Dad, I'm sure of it," Emily said enthusiastically as she entered the main house, a colonial mansion that held stories of several generations. Thomas Parker, her father, merely nodded with a weak smile. There was something in his eyes, a shadow that Emily had been noticing for weeks, but that he tried to disguise. Her mother, Sarah, seemed equally downcast, always exchanging worried glances with her husband when they thought their daughter wasn't watching. That night, during dinner, the silence weighed more than usual. Emily placed her cutlery on her plate and faced her parents. "Are you going to tell me what's going on, or will I need to find out for myself?" Thomas sighed deeply and exchanged a look with his wife. "Emily, we need to talk about the vineyard's future." The words that followed fell like stones on Emily's dreams. The vineyard was on the verge of bankruptcy. Accumulated debts, investments, gone wrong. Contracts that inexplicably became unfavorable. It was as if an invisible force had systematically sabotaged the family business. But how? "Our sales increased last quarter. The wines won international awards," Emily questioned, incredulous. "It's more complex than that, honey. We've been facing problems for years that we've tried to resolve without worrying you. We wanted to protect your dreams, but now?" Sarah's voice faltered. In the following weeks, Emily immersed herself in the vineyard's accounting books, trying to understand how they reached this situation. She cancelled her master's program enrollment and dedicated herself entirely to finding a solution. She sent proposals to investors and banks, tried partnerships. All doors seemed closed, until on a rainy afternoon her father entered her room with an expression she would never forget. "Emily, a solution has appeared." The proposal came through an intermediary. Richard Montgomery, an oil billionaire and admirer of Parker wines, offered to settle all the vineyard's debts and inject capital for its modernization. In exchange, he demanded a marriage agreement with Emily. "This is absurd. We're in the 21st century. Nobody makes this kind of deal anymore," Emily shouted, indignant. "It's just a symbolic marriage, honey, a cultural arrangement that has value for him. You won't need to—" Thomas couldn't complete the sentence. His voice choked with shame. "I won't need to what, Dad? Be a real wife? Is that what you're telling me?" Emily questioned, her eyes watering. The days that followed were ones of intense internal conflict. Emily oscillated between revolt and resignation. She saw the desperation in her parents' eyes, the fear of losing not only their source of income, but the legacy of generations. The vineyard wasn't just a business. It was the family's history. It was her grandfather's memory. It was the future she herself had dreamed of. On a starry night, sitting alone among the vineyards, Emily made her decision. It wasn't for money or luxury. It was out of loyalty, for love of that piece of land that ran in her veins like her own blood. The intermediary, a man with severe features named Lawrence, handled all the details. Emily signed documents in languages she barely understood, receiving only summarized translations. Everything happened quickly, as if they feared she might change her mind. It will be just for a year at most too. Mr. Montgomery is already elderly and has health problems. He just wants a young wife to accompany him in his final years, explained Lawrence with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The farewell was heartbreaking. Emily embraced every inch of the vineyard, memorizing aromas, textures, landscapes. Her parents cried silently, divided between relief over the financial salvation and guilt for allowing such a sacrifice. "I'll be back," promised Emily, trying to smile through tears. This is just a detour in the path, not the end of the journey. The flight to Palm Springs was the longest of her life, not because of the miles, but the weight of uncertainties. At the airport, she was received by a formal entourage without smiles or human warmth. A limousine took her to an isolated mansion, surrounded by an exuberant garden that contrasted with the desert around it. The first impression was one of dazzlement. The palace was a monument to luxury, with rare marbles, gold, and crystals everywhere. But soon Emily realized that this opulence was as cold as the walls that surrounded her. Her room, although sumptuous, seemed like a golden cage. Silent staff brought her meals, helped with her clothes, but avoided her eyes. No one conversed beyond what was strictly necessary. For 3 days, she didn't see the man who was now her husband. When she was finally called to his presence, she felt a chill as she entered the spacious office decorated with priceless art objects. Richard Montgomery was older than she had imagined. His grey hair and deep wrinkles contrasted with a penetrating gaze that evaluated her from head to toe without ceremony. He spoke with a heavy accent, but perfectly understandable English. "You're more beautiful in person than in the photographs," he said, without getting up from his armchair. "I hope you're comfortable in your new home." "This is not my home," replied Emily, surprising herself with her courage. "It's just a place where I'll stay temporarily." An enigmatic smile appeared on the millionaire's lips. "Temporarily? Yes. Time is always relative, don't you think?" Those words and the tone with which they were spoken made Emily realize with growing horror that the promises made weren't worth the paper they were written on. There, in that moment, she understood that she wasn't a guest, she wasn't a symbolic wife. She was a possession, acquired like the artworks that decorated those imposing walls, and her true captivity was just beginning. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Emily lived in an emotional limbo, wandering through the sumptuous corridors of the mansion like a ghost. Her meals were served on fine porcelain, her clothes were from renowned designers, but her heart withered away from everything she loved. Richard maintained a mysterious routine. She would go days without seeing him, only to be abruptly summoned for silent dinners or walks through the gardens, where he would talk about his vast collection of exotic plants. He never asked about her, her dreams, or her previous life. It was as if Emily were just another item in his collection. The calls to her family were monitored. She managed to speak with her parents only once a week, brief and superficial conversations. "I'm fine," she would lie, while observing Lawrence, always present, noting every word exchanged. The letters she wrote were read before being sent. Internet was restricted, her cell phone controlled. "The vineyard is thriving," her father would tell her, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "The investments allowed us to modernize the entire production. This year we'll have the largest harvest in history." Emily would smile on the phone, silent tears streaming down. At least her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Her family was safe, the legacy preserved, but at what cost? One night, after 4 months in that golden prison, Richard called her to his private room. Emily's heart raced. She knew what that meant. The promises of a symbolic marriage had gradually dissolved, and now came the moment she feared so much. "You are my wife before the law and customs," he said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. Emily recognized the bottle. It was from her family's vineyard. "It's time to consummate this marriage." Emily trembled, the glass almost slipping from her fingers. She thought about running away, screaming, fighting. But where would she go? Who would help her in this foreign land, where she knew no one and didn't speak the language? Richard approached, his strong perfume invading Emily's nostrils. His wrinkled Hands touched her face with a delicacy that seemed even more terrifying. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "I'll be gentle." It was at this moment that the unexpected happened. Richard staggered, his expression suddenly contorted in pain. The glass fell shattering on the marble floor. He clutched his chest, then his head, and collapsed at Emily's feet. "Help!" she screamed, kneeling beside the man. "Someone, please, help!" The room was invaded by security guards and employees. An ambulance was called. Everything happened in a confused whirlwind. Emily was pushed away out of the room while doctors tried to revive Richard. Hours later, Lawrence informed her. Richard Montgomery had suffered a severe stroke. He was alive, but in a deep coma. The doctors had no prognosis for recovery. "What happens now?" asked Emily, stunned. "You remain his wife," Lawrence responded coldly. "Nothing changes." And indeed, for the outside world, nothing changed. Emily remained in the mansion, now even more isolated. The hospital visits were made without her presence. Medical decisions were made without her consultation. It was as if, for all intents and purposes, she didn't exist beyond her title. The following months were of profound solitude. Emily found some solace in the books from the vast library, learning about the local culture, studying the language on her own. She made the garden her refuge, caring for the plants with the same affection she dedicated to the vines in her homeland. Occasionally, younger or newly hired staff would risk brief conversations, offering small glimpses of the outside world. It was through a young maid named Amber that Emily learned that Richard's health was worsening each day. "His children are returning from various parts of the world," Amber whispered while tidying the room. "They say it's to say goodbye." Emily felt neither joy nor sadness at the news, just a strange emptiness, as if she were emotionally anesthetized. Richard had never been a real husband to her, but his condition kept her trapped in that limbo. On a spring morning, exactly 1 year after her arrival, Emily was summoned to Lawrence's office. The man seemed even more serious than usual. "Mr. Richard Montgomery passed away during the night," he announced without preamble. "As his widow, you have certain rights and obligations." Emily felt a wave of contradictory emotions: relief, guilt, further relief, fear of the future, hope for freedom. "Can I return to California now?" she asked, trying to contain the anxiety in her voice. "Not immediately," Lawrence replied. "There are legal issues to be resolved. The will shall be read after the funeral rites." The following days were of palpable tension. The mansion was taken over by relatives, lawyers, and government officials. Emily was formally introduced as the widow, but the looks she received ranged from contempt to morbid curiosity. Finally, a week after the passing, everyone was gathered in the Great C Hall for the reading of the will. Emily sat isolated in a corner, feeling like an intruder in that family gathering. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with an impassive expression, read the document. With each clause, growing murmurs ran through the room. Emily tried to understand the complex legal terms, but one phrase caught her attention like lightning. "To my wife, Emily Parker Montgomery, I leave 20% of my personal fortune, the property in the Hamptons, New York, and administrative control of Parker Vineyards, now part of the Montgomery conglomerate." An absolute silence fell over the hall, followed by indignant exclamations. Emily remained static, unable to process what she had just heard. She, who thought she would leave there with only the clothes on her back, was being named heir to an incalculable fortune. "There must be some mistake," she stammered. "There is no mistake," replied the lawyer. "Mr. Montgomery left explicit instructions, updated 3 days before the stroke. Everything is legally registered." Richard's children and family members looked at Emily as if she were a criminal. An elegant woman, whom Emily would later discover to be Victoria, Richard's eldest stepdaughter, rose furiously. "This is absurd. She's been here for just 1 year. She didn't even know my father well. How can she inherit something our family built for generations?" "The wishes of Mr. Montgomery are clear," insisted the lawyer. "And there is an additional clause. Any legal contestation by the family will result in the loss of their respective benefits." The climate in the mansion became unbearable after the reading of the will. Emily, now theoretically rich and powerful, felt more vulnerable than ever. The staff, previously just distant, now treated her with open hostility. Meals arrived cold or late. Small accidents occurred frequently. A carpet that mysteriously came loose from the stairs, a vase that almost fell on her head. One night, she found her room ransacked, her few family photos torn. There was no one to complain to. Lawrence had disappeared after the reading of the will, replaced by a new administrator who barely spoke English. It was in this hostile environment that Emily heard rumors about the arrival of Richard's youngest, son Jason Montgomery. Unlike the other children, he had been absent for years, supposedly studying at American and European universities. They said he was his father's favorite, but that they had fallen out. "He's coming to contest the will," Amber told her, now the only person in the mansion who still spoke to Emily. "They say he's different from the others, more Western, more modern." Emily didn't harbor hopes. Modern or not, Jason would probably see her as everyone else did, an opportunist who had deceived his elderly father to get part of the fortune. What she didn't know was that this man's arrival would transform her fate in ways she could never have imagined. Jason Montgomery arrived on a sunny morning. Emily spotted him from her bedroom window, tall, athletic, dressed in Western clothes with unpretentious elegance. Unlike his father's other children, he didn't arrive with an entourage, just a driver carrying his luggage. For days, she avoided meeting him, changing her meal times and garden walks. But one afternoon, while reading under the shade of a century-old olive tree, she felt a presence. Looking up, she found Jason observing her with intensity. "Finally we meet, Emily Parker," he said in a perfect English, surprising her. "You speak English well," she remarked, closing her book. "I lived in California for 2 years," he replied, sitting on a nearby bench without asking permission. "I thought it would be polite to meet you in person." There was something in the way he looked at her, not with contempt or anger, but with genuine curiosity, that made Emily uncomfortable. It was easier to deal with declared hostility than with this enigmatic interest. "Have you come to join those trying to invalidate the will?" she asked directly. A brief smile touched Jason's lips. "I'm here to understand, not to accuse. The story everyone tells about you doesn't seem to match what I see." "And what do you see?" "A woman who lives like a prisoner in a house that's supposedly hers. Someone who inherited millions, but always wears the same 3 outfits. Someone who could be anywhere in the world, but remains isolated in this garden, reading books in a language few here understand." The precision of that observation left Emily speechless. It was as if he had seen through the layers of protection she had built around herself. In the days that followed, Jason would appear at the most unexpected moments. Sometimes he would just greet her and go on his way. Other times, he would sit nearby and they would talk about trivial matters, books, music, places they both knew. He never mentioned his father or the will. Emily found herself waiting for these encounters, anxious for the only person who treated her as a human being and not as an intruder or a threat. Still, she remained cautious. After all, he was Richard's son, heir to an empire. What interest would he have in a simple Californian woman other than perhaps discovering some weakness he could use against her? One night, after a particularly tense dinner with other family members, Emily found Jason in the library. He seemed absorbed in old photo albums. "My father looks different in these images," he commented when he noticed her presence. "Younger, of course, but also more alive." Emily approached hesitantly. In the photographs, a decades younger Richard smiled next to a beautiful woman with delicate features. "Your mother?" she asked. "Yes, she passed when I was 12. A car accident." There was a shadow of pain in his voice. "After that, my father changed, became more rigid, more controlling. Our relationship was never the same." "I'm sorry," said Emily, genuinely moved. "You know, I spent years trying to understand my father. Even when we disagreed, even when I distanced myself, I always sought to comprehend his motivations." Jason closed the album carefully. "That's why I'm here now, to understand why at the end of his life he chose you." The sincerity of those words touched Emily. For the first time since she arrived in this country, she felt she could lower her guard, if only slightly. "I'd like to know." "That too," she confessed. "I never understood why he chose our vineyard, our family. Why me?" Jason looked at her for a long time, as if making an important decision. "Perhaps we can find out together." In the following weeks, an unlikely partnership formed. Jason had access to his father's private documents and files, and Emily possessed pieces of the puzzle he didn't know. Together, they began to map the events that led to the marriage agreement. The revelation came gradually, like a slow poison spreading through the veins. Analyzing contracts, bank transfers, and recovered emails, Jason discovered a network, meticulously built by his father. Richard had deliberately sabotaged Parker Vineyards for years, using shell companies to acquire debts, manipulate supplier prices, and block new investments. "He planned everything," said Jason, his voice trembling with indignation, as he showed Emily the documents. "Your family's bankruptcy wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated so you would have no choice but to accept the agreement." Emily felt the world spin. As much as she suspected something was wrong with that story, she never imagined such a level of manipulation. But why? Why would he do this? Why me? Jason hesitated, then opened a drawer and took out an old photograph. In it, a young woman with brown hair and green eyes smiled in front of vineyards. "Is this your mother?" asked Emily, noticing the resemblance. To herself, "No. This is your paternal grandmother, Margaret Parker, photographed during a visit to Europe in the 1960s. Jason took a deep breath. "My father met her during that trip. They had a brief but intense relationship. When he returned to our country to take over the family business, he promised to come back for her. But her family opposed the relationship, and she ended up marrying another man." "My grandfather," whispered Emily, the pieces fitting together with horror. "Your father spent decades planning revenge." "Or a distorted way of recovering what he believed he had lost," replied Jason. "In his personal notes, I found mentions of you since you were a teenager. He followed your life from afar through private investigators. When he saw how much you resembled Margaret, he developed an obsession." Emily felt nauseated. Her entire life had been observed, manipulated. Her future had been traced by a man she had never met, driven by a frustrated love that had transformed into something sick. "That's monstrous," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," agreed Jason, sitting beside her, "and that's why I can no longer be part of this farce. I cannot allow my father's sick obsession to continue causing harm, even after his departure." That night, they talked until dawn. Emily told Jason about the never-consummated marriage, about the isolation, about the veiled threats she faced daily. He shared his own grievances, the conflicted relationship with his father, the years of voluntary estrangement. Something changed between them after that night. Distrust gave way to mutual understanding, a complicity born of shared pain. They began to meet more frequently, no longer to investigate the past, but to get to know each other in the present. It was on one of those afternoons as they walked through the gardens under the setting sun that Jason took Emily's hand for the first time. The touch, simple and gentle, awakened in her sensations she believed had been buried under layers of trauma and resignation. "I need to tell you something," he said, his expression serious. "Tomorrow there will be a family council meeting. I'm going to formally renounce any contestation of the will and publicly recognize your rights as my father's widow." Emily stared at him, surprised. "Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do, and because—" He hesitated, seeking the right words. "Because I care about you, Emily, in a way I didn't expect, in a way that might be too complicated considering the circumstances." Emily's heart raced. For so long, she had lived in a constant state of alert, distrusting everyone, protecting herself from new pains. But there, looking into Jason's eyes, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she confessed, her voice low. "There's so much broken inside me." "I'm not asking for anything beyond what you want to give," he replied. I just wanted you to know that for me you were never a contract or an obligation. You are simply Emily." Those words broke down the last barriers. When he leaned in to kiss her, Emily didn't back away. The kiss was delicate, almost hesitant, as if they were both learning a new language together. As promised, Jason defended Emily at the family meeting. The reaction was explosive. Victoria, the stepdaughter who most vocally opposed Emily, accused her half-brother of betrayal. Others suggested he was being manipulated, or worse, that he had become an accomplice to a scam. "Are you also blinded by money that you can't see what our father did?" confronted Jason. "He manipulated, deceived, and practically kidnapped a young woman to satisfy a sick obsession. And now you want to perpetuate this injustice?" The following weeks were of transformation. With Jason's public support, Emily's position in the family and in business strengthened. She began to participate in meetings, to learn about investments, to make plans for the future. More importantly, she began to dream again. The relationship with Jason blossomed naturally, like a plant that finally finds sun after a long period of shade. He respected her space, understood her moments of hesitation, celebrated each small step toward healing. For the first time since leaving California, Emily gave herself willingly, not out of obligation or fear. Physical love, which before represented threat and submission, became a genuine expression of affection and mutual discovery. It was after one of those nights of intimacy that Emily began to feel the first signs: morning sickness, increased sensitivity, a tiredness different from anything she had ever experienced. When the test confirmed her suspicion, she was paralyzed, a whirlwind of contradictory emotions dominating her thoughts. A life was growing inside her, a life created not by contract or coercion, but by love and choice. It should be a moment of joy, but something prevented her from sharing the news with Jason. Revisiting the will documents, Emily found a clause that had gone unnoticed in previous readings. If she became pregnant before completing a year as a widow, she would lose all rights to the inheritance unless the child's father was officially recognized by the Montgomery family. And there was more. A subclause stipulated that in case of breach of this condition, Emily would be obligated to pay compensation equivalent to everything she had received. An impossible amount that would ruin her forever, as well as her family. With fear and confusion, Emily made a painful decision. She would hide the pregnancy until she understood how to proceed. She needed to protect not only herself, but also the child she carried and the still fragile relationship with Jason. What she didn't know was that secrets, like seeds, grow and eventually find their way to the light, transforming everything in their path. For almost 2 months, Emily managed to hide her condition. Looser clothes, excuses about indispositions to avoid certain foods, briefer meetings with Jason so he wouldn't notice the subtle changes in her body. Each day was an exercise in emotional tightrope, walking between the secret joy of feeling life growing within her and the fear of the consequences. But Jason was not an inattentive man. He began to notice the patterns: how Emily avoided wine at meals, how she always had an excuse not to spend the entire night with him, how her eyes now carried a different sparkle mixed with a shadow of constant concern. One night, as they dined alone on the mansion's veranda, he set down his cutlery and held her hand firmly. "Emily, what's going on? And don't tell me it's nothing, because we both know there's something." She looked away, feeling her heart race. "I don't know what you're talking about. For the past few weeks you've been distant, physically present, but emotionally absent, as if you're keeping a secret that's consuming you from the inside." His voice was gentle but firm. "After everything we've faced together, I thought we had promised each other honesty." Those words hit her like a sure arrow. Tears began to form in her eyes. How to explain? How to tell about the pregnancy without mentioning the clause that could separate them forever? "I'm pregnant," she finally confessed, her voice almost a whisper. Jason's face lit up instantly. "Emily, that's wonderful." But seeing that she didn't share his enthusiasm, his expression changed. "Isn't that what you wanted?" "It's not that simple," she replied, finally meeting his gaze. "There's something in the will, a clause I hadn't noticed before." Slowly, Emily explained about the restriction: pregnancy within the first year of widowhood, the need for family recognition, the threat of financial ruin. Victoria and the others will never accept this child as legitimate, she concluded. They'll use this as a pretext to take everything, to destroy us. To her surprise, Jason didn't show the despair she expected. Instead, a serene smile formed on his face. Do you really think I would let that happen? That I would allow my own son or daughter to be used as a weapon against their mother? But the clause requires family recognition. I am Richard's son. My recognition is all we need. He squeezed her hand harder. Tomorrow I will make a public declaration. Everyone will know this child is mine and that I'm proud of it. It's not that simple, warned Emily. They'll say you're being manipulated, that we're conspiring. Let them say it. The determination in his voice was unshakable. I've lived too long trying to please a family that cares more about money than people. This child is my fresh start, our chance to build something based on love, not contracts or obligations. The next morning, true to his word, Jason called a press conference. Before cameras and journalists, he announced not only that Emily was expecting his child, but also that he intended to formalize their relationship as soon as possible. The Montgomery family's reaction was immediate and violent. Victoria, supported by renowned lawyers, filed lawsuits questioning the paternity, alleging that Emily had deceived Jason as part of a plan to secure her position in the family fortune. The media, always eager for scandals involving billionaires, transformed the case into an international soap opera. Tabloids published sensationalist headlines: Californian Black Widow ensnares heir, The Cradle Scheme, how a foreigner conquered a dynasty. Social media was divided. While some saw Emily as a cold opportunist, others portrayed her as a victim of a cruel family. Her image was dissected, her past investigated, her life transformed into public entertainment. The siege was closing in. Even in the mansion, which theoretically was hers, Emily didn't feel safe. She began receiving threatening letters in her room, coded messages suggesting danger. Jason discovered that a private investigator hired by Victoria was constantly following them. This can't continue, he said after another exhausting hearing in court. We need to think about the baby, about your health. That's when they made a radical decision: to retreat. In a move that surprised everyone, Emily and Jason announced they were giving up most of Richard's inheritance. They would keep only Parker Vineyards, now restored and profitable, and a small isolated property on the coast of Maine. We don't need empires or fortunes, Jason explained to the press. We need peace to raise our family. The strategy worked. Without the billion-dollar financial incentive, media interest gradually decreased. The lawsuits were withdrawn one by one as the greedy family members secured their enlarged slices of the Montgomery empire. 3 months later, Emily and Jason were landing at the small airport near Parker Vineyards. Emily's reunion with her parents was emotional. Tight hugs, tears of joy, surprise at the already visible 4-month pregnancy. We never lost hope of seeing you again, said Sarah, caressing her daughter's face. But this, a grandchild, it's more than we dreamed of. The vineyard was transformed. The investments made by Richard, ironically, had truly modernized production and expanded the business. The grapes had never been healthier, the wine never more award-winning. As they walked through the vineyards at sunset, Emily felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. There, among the vines she'd known since childhood, beside the man she had learned to love, carrying a new life within her, she finally felt at home. I thought I would never return, she confessed to Jason, as they watched the sun tinge the hills golden. There were moments when I believed I would spend the rest of my life trapped in that mansion, alone with my memories. The universe has strange paths, he replied, embracing her from behind, his hands resting on her belly. My father thought he was sealing your fate, but ended up creating the path to our happiness. The months that followed were of adaptation and preparation. Emily resumed her enology studies, now applying the knowledge directly to the family vineyard. Jason, with his training in international business, brought new perspectives to the business, helping to expand exports to still unexplored markets. They married in a simple ceremony among the vineyards, with only family and close friends present. There was no ostentatious luxury or rigid protocols, just love, music, and the best wine of the harvest. Peace, however, would be briefly interrupted. With just 1 month to go before the birth, Emily received a summons. She would need to testify in a final lawsuit filed by Victoria, who was still trying to invalidate the property division agreement. "Don't go," begged Jason. "It's not worth the risk, not at this stage of pregnancy." "I need to close this chapter," replied Emily with determination, "for our son to be born in a world without this shadow." The courtroom was packed. Journalists, curious onlookers, and the Montgomery family occupied every available seat. When Emily entered, supported by Jason and her parents, a murmur ran through the room. For hours, she was subjected to captious questions, cruel insinuations, and attempts to make her contradict herself. Victoria's lawyer was particularly aggressive, suggesting that the relationship with Jason was a calculated staging to preserve her rights to the inheritance. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, his voice loaded with contempt, "if you admit now that it was all a strategy, my client will be willing to make a generous agreement. Otherwise, we will contest every cent you received, every property, even the legitimacy of the child you are expecting." A tense silence took over the courtroom. All eyes turned to Emily. It was her chance to end everything with a simple lie. She just had to say yes, that she had manipulated Jason, that the relationship was a farce. But looking at Jason, who watched her with love and trust, Emily made her choice. "What exists between me and Jason is real," she declared with a firm voice. "It was born from the ashes of a painful story built upon difficult truths. It's not perfect, but it's genuine, and our son will be raised knowing he came from love, not from contracts or obligations." Her sincerity touched even the most skeptical in the courtroom. Victoria, realizing she had lost not only the case, but also the public narrative, withdrew the action the following day. Exactly 1 month later, in the early hours of a spring morning, Ethan was born. With his mother's green eyes and his father's strong features, he was the embodiment of a new beginning, living proof that even stories that begin with pain can end in joy. At the baptism ceremony, held among the vineyard's vines, Emily observed the scene with overflowing gratitude, her parents spoiling their grandson, Jason gently rocking little Ethan, friends and employees celebrating the vineyard's new heir. "You know what's most amazing?" she commented to Jason when they were finally alone watching the sunset from the same spot where they had exchanged vows. "For a long time I thought I was trapped in a story written by someone else, that my destiny had been traced without my consent." "And wasn't it true?" he asked, holding their sleeping son in his arms. "No," replied Emily, a serene smile on her lips. "Because even in the darkest moments, even when I seemed to have no choice, I was writing my own story. Each decision, each silent resistance, each hope I kept alive, all of this brought me here." She looked at the distant vineyard, at the vines that stretched as far as the eye could see. The same vines that witnessed her childhood would now see her son grow. The cycle renewed itself, as nature itself teaches. "Grapes need to face winter to give the best wines," she said, remembering the words her grandfather used to repeat. "It's in adversity that character, flavor, depth are built." Jason gently kissed her forehead. "And we, my love, survived the harshest of winters." Emily smiled, knowing that their story, with all its pains and joys, its unexpected detours, and precious discoveries, was just beginning. Like a good wine, it would improve with time, gaining layers and complexity, becoming richer with each passing year. And there, among the reborn vines, under the starry sky of her native land, Emily finally understood. She was no longer a prisoner, a widow, or a reluctant heiress. She was simply Emily, mother, wife, enologist, mistress of her own destiny. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily and Jason's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging stories. Find it here, clicking on the left. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore life's complexity and the surprises of destiny.